Undoubtedly, the most vivid symbol of Italian Rome in the imagination of the modern person is the famous Colosseum. In light of the new chronology, many notions about ancient history are undergoing significant changes. Naturally, the question arises: when and by whom was the Colosseum in Italian Rome built? What is it? An ancient original or a later imitation? And if it is an imitation, what ancient prototype was it attempting to reproduce? We have already discussed in detail that many supposedly ancient monuments of Italian Rome were not built in antiquity, as is commonly believed, but much later. They were constructed in the 15th–16th centuries by the Roman popes, who appeared in Italian Rome relatively recently, only around 1453. The first popes of Rome were, most likely, refugees from Constantinople, the capital of the Roman Empire, which was destroyed in 1453 by the Ottoman Turks. Today, that city is the Turkish metropolis of Istanbul. Most of the supposedly ancient structures of Italian Rome were built by these refugee popes as imitations of the authentic structures that once stood in their former homeland in Constantinople. The Colosseum is no exception. A single careful look at it is enough to notice that it was initially constructed as ancient ruins. The traces of its later construction are very clear. According to the Great Soviet Encyclopedia, the Colosseum was built using stone, concrete, and brick. Isn't it odd that such a supposedly ancient structure contains concrete? Historians might argue that concrete was invented by the ancient Romans about 2,000 years ago. But why then wasn't it widely used in medieval construction? In our opinion, all supposedly ancient concrete structures are of much later origin than historians assume. Let's examine the brickwork of the Colosseum's interior walls closely. We are not referring to restored sections. There are no visible traces of authentic restoration in the Colosseum. All the brickwork looks approximately the same and is made from uniform bricks. In many places, the edges of the bricks are neatly chipped. It is clear that the bricks were chipped before being laid, not afterward. In other words, when the Colosseum was built, it was immediately artificially aged to simulate centuries of wear. The same can be said about the supposedly collapsed sections of brickwork inside the Colosseum. These sections were clearly made artificially, constructed in their current collapsed form from the outset. If the brickwork had genuinely collapsed, the exposed interior bricks would align with the original surface of the walls, not be angled inward. Furthermore, a significant portion of the bricks in the collapse would have been chipped or broken. This is not the case in the Colosseum. The collapsed sections of walls were laid from the start in their current collapsed state using intact bricks. Most of the bricks are deliberately angled relative to the surface of the wall to simulate a supposedly chaotic fracture pattern. However, masons, accustomed to laying bricks evenly, were unable to achieve true randomness. The collapsed brickwork clearly displays an underlying order. The repairs and adjustments, visible in the Colosseum's walls, also look nothing like authentic ones. The neatly arranged remnants of old arches appear oddly out of place against the pristine, even brick walls of the Colosseum. It is clear that all these adjustments were made during the initial construction to create an appearance of antiquity. Authentic adjustments to arches, windows, and doors, inevitable in older buildings that sink into the ground over time, look completely different. For comparison, consider this photograph of the outer wall of the High Irene Cathedral in Istanbul. It shows numerous signs of genuine alterations. Notice how the upper sections of the cathedral's walls look significantly newer than the lower sections. The lower sections, in contrast, are much older and feature more modifications. However, in the Colosseum, the brickwork is remarkably uniform in its freshness across all levels. Moreover, in genuinely old buildings, the lower parts of the structure are usually buried underground or in an excavation pit. For example, the Hagia Irene Cathedral stands in a trench approximately 4 meters deep. But there is no such trench around the Colosseum. There are no signs that it has sunk significantly into the ground over time. Could it really be that, in the 2,000 years supposedly elapsed since its construction, no noticeable cultural deposit has built up around the Colosseum? This is very strange. It's worth noting that the Colosseum's construction is ongoing even today. In this photograph, you can clearly see how the work on extending the Colosseum's brick wall with ancient white stone is progressing. This is being done openly in full view of tourists using movable scaffolding. So, when was the Colosseum actually built? It turns out that the Vatican doesn't particularly hide this fact. For example, in the Vatican Palace, there is a fresco on public display showing the Colosseum, newly designed, emerging from a sheet of paper and taking shape in reality, immediately as ruins. Next to the Colosseum is an angel holding a compass and a builder's square, assisting in the Colosseum's construction. But whom is the angel helping? Surely not a pagan emperor, which would be inappropriate for an angel. Not at all. The builder's name and the year of construction are clearly indicated on the fresco. Next to the depiction of the Colosseum, we read, the 7th year of Pope Pius VII. Since Pope Pius VII reigned from 1800 to 1823, this refers to the year 1807 AD. The same year is repeated in the inscription beneath the fresco. Here is the translation. The Flavian Amphitheatre. Pius VII. Builder in the year 1807 of ruins resting sublimely upon solid ground and further upon diverse foundations. Without delving into the nuances of translation, it is unmistakably stated here that Pope Pius VII is named as the builder of the Colosseum's ruins. It is also implied that the beginning of construction, or perhaps merely the project's approval, occurred in 1807. Thus, in the Vatican Palace, the construction of the Colosseum as ancient ruins in 1807 AD is openly depicted. It is shown that the process began with drafting a design, which likely means that in 1807, the Colosseum was just starting to be built. But who then completed its construction? The answer is likely found on the ceremonial marble plaque hanging right above the entrance to the Colosseum. In large letters, it bears the name of Pope Pius IX, who reigned from 1846 to 1878. The year of the Colosseum's restoration is also indicated. This significant event took place in 1852, the 7th year of Pius IX's reign. This is most likely the true date of the Colosseum's completion. 1852, the mid-19th century. After its completion, the Colosseum received extensive promotion. On July 7, 2007, it was even included in the list of the so-called New Seven Wonders of the World. But if the Colosseum was built in the 19th century, on what basis was it attributed to Emperor Flavius Vespasian, who supposedly lived in the 1st century AD? What do historians tell us about the Colosseum? The Colosseum is the largest of the ancient Roman amphitheaters and one of the most remarkable buildings in the entire world. It is located in Rome, on the site where a pond once stood. Construction began under the Emperor Vespasian after his victories in Judea, and completed in 80 AD under his successor and heir, Emperor Titus. Initially, the Colosseum was named the Flavian Amphitheatre after these rulers. Its current name, Colosseum, became established later. For a long time, the Colosseum was a favorite venue for entertaining spectacles among the residents of Rome. However, barbarian invasions led to its neglect and began its deterioration. From the 11th century until 1132, it served as a fortress for noble Roman families, particularly the Frangipani and Annibaldi families. The latter, however, were forced to cede the Colosseum to Emperor Henry VII, who gifted it to the Roman Senate and people. Even in 1332, local aristocrats held bullfights there, but from that time onward, the systematic dismantling of the Colosseum began. In the 15th and 16th centuries, Pope Paul II used its materials to construct the Palazzo Venezia. Cardinal Riario used it for the Palace of the Chancellery, and Paul III for the Farnese Palace. However, a significant part of it survived. Sixtus V intended to use the materials for a cloth factory, and Clement IX actually turned the Colosseum into a plant for extracting saltpeter. A better attitude towards the majestic monument from the popes only began in the mid-18th century. Benedict XIV ordered a massive cross to be erected in the middle of its arena and surrounded it with a series of altars in memory of the Passion, the procession to Calvary, and the crucifixion of the Savior. This cross and the altars were removed from the Colosseum only in 1874. Thus, during the reign of Clement IX, 1592–1605, there was a cloth factory operating on the site of the Colosseum, and prior to that, it was likely just a pond. At that time, the Colosseum most likely did not exist at all. It seems probable that the first person to conceive of erecting the Colosseum was Pope Benedict XIV. However, even he clearly intended to create not an ancient monument but a memorial to Christian martyrs. Nevertheless, his successors took the project in a different direction. Under them, the actual construction of the modern Colosseum began, presented as if it were merely a light restoration of an ancient monument. Here is what the Encyclopedic Dictionary reports. The popes following Benedict XIV, especially Pius VII and Leo XII, reinforced the sections of the walls that were in danger of collapse, though, in reality, they built the walls of the Colosseum. Pius IX repaired some of the interior staircases, but in truth, he constructed the inner portions of the Colosseum. The Colosseum is now even more carefully preserved by the current Italian government, under whose orders and with the guidance of scholars and archaeologists, curious excavations have been carried out on the arena. These excavations led to the discovery of underground chambers once used to elevate groups of people, animals, trees, and other decorations onto the arena floor, or to fill it with water and raise ships for staging naumachii. The idea proposed by historians of naumachii, naval battles staged on the Colosseum's water-filled arena, is particularly absurd. No clear or plausible explanations are given as to how, by what means, or with what mechanisms the arena could have been filled with water. Where are the inflow and outflow pipes? Water pressure devices? Waterproof walls with signs of water containment? None of these exist in the Colosseum. We will later clarify the true origins of these legends about naumachii. But one might argue, if the Colosseum was built in the 19th century as you claim, then authors of the 17th and 18th centuries would not have known about it. Is this true? Yes, it appears to be the case. To verify this, let us turn to existing 17th century sources, which, in all likelihood, would have mentioned such a remarkable structure as the Colosseum if they had known anything about it. However, it turns out that not a single one of these sources mentions the Colosseum. Let us provide two of the most striking examples. First, let us open the illustrated chronicle of Ivan the Terrible, Litsovoy Letopisny Svod, a detailed account of Russian world history, usually dated to the 16th century. In our opinion, the illustrated chronicle was created not in the 16th but in the 17th century. However, this detail is not critical in this case. Volumes 2 and 3 describe the history of ancient Rome in great detail. Conveniently, a significant portion is devoted specifically to the reign of Emperor Flavius Vespasian, whom historians credit with founding the Colosseum. It is worth noting that the illustrated chronicle is far from an ordinary chronicle. Firstly, it is extremely detailed. Secondly, it was intended for the Tsar and his inner circle, so it was written with particular care. Enormous resources were spent on its creation. Some volumes of the chronicle were held in the Moscow Tsar's library and personally owned by Peter the Great. The chronicle contains over 16,000 exquisite color illustrations, including many depicting the city of Rome. Therefore, if even there, the Colosseum is not mentioned, neither in the text nor in the illustrations, we must conclude that in 16th–17th century Moscow, nothing was yet known about the Colosseum. Astonishingly, no such mentions indeed exist. But could it be that the illustrated chronicle remains silent about the Colosseum simply because it does not mention the structures built by Emperor Vespasian in Rome at all? No, that is not the case. The illustrated chronicle recounts in considerable detail how Vespasian, upon returning to Rome from the Judean War, immediately initiated the construction of enormous and extraordinary buildings. However, the Colosseum is not among them. In fact, there is no mention of an amphitheater at all. Only temples, treasuries, and libraries are mentioned. The illustrated chronicle, by the way, provides detailed depictions of what Vespasian built in Rome. Carpenters with axes are shown erecting various buildings. No amphitheater is among them. For completeness, let us provide an excerpt from the illustrated chronicle that discusses Vespasian's constructions in Rome. As we mentioned earlier, Vespasian began planning them immediately after returning from the Judean War. Here is a translation into contemporary language. Vespasian pondered how to create an altar for the idol and soon erected something that surpassed all human imagination. He placed there all the most precious garments, and everything marvelous and unattainable was gathered and displayed there. Because of all this, people from all over the world travel and labor just to see it with their own eyes. Vespasian also hung the Judaic curtains there, as if boasting of them, and all the gold-embroidered robes, while the books of laws he ordered to be stored in the palace. As we can see, the illustrated chronicle does not miss the opportunity to describe Vespasian's remarkable constructions in Rome, erected after the Judean War. But the Colosseum is not among them. Likewise, the Theatrum Historicum of 1680, a comprehensive world chronicle that describes Roman events in great detail, knows nothing of the Colosseum. Like the illustrated chronicle, it mentions only Vespasian's construction of some temple of peace after the conclusion of the Judean War. The year of our Lord 77, the Temple of Peace is being constructed. In it are placed the ornaments of the Jerusalem temple, that is, the golden vessels of the Jews. The law and the crimson coverings are ordered by Vespasian to be preserved in the chambers. The description of Vespasian's constructions ends here. The Theatrum Historicum makes no mention of the Colosseum or any amphitheater built by Vespasian in Rome. Furthermore, in the detailed index of names and titles at the end of the chronicle, the name Colosseum does not appear. There are no similar names either. It turns out that the Theatrum Historicum, like the illustrated chronicle, knows nothing of the Colosseum. Although it was written in 1680 and its author, presumably should have known about such an outstanding structure as the Colosseum, and referred to it specifically by that name. After all, historians tell us that this name became established for the Colosseum as early as the 8th century AD. It follows that in the 17th century, the Colosseum was indeed unknown. But let us now turn to ancient writers. What do they know about the greatest building of ancient Rome, the Grand Colosseum? It is believed that Suetonius, Eutropius, and others, presumably ancient authors, wrote about the Colosseum. There is also an opinion that the Colosseum was allegedly praised by the 1st century AD poet Martial, who even attempted to include it among the 7 wonders of the world. remarkably anticipating the decision of modern historians to include the Colosseum among the new 7 wonders of the world in 2007. But did ancient writers truly speak of the Colosseum in Italian Rome and not some other amphitheater? As we have shown in works on chronology, the true ancient Rome has no connection to modern Italian Rome. Could it be that the original Colosseum is not in Italy but elsewhere? And another important question: when, by whom, and where were the writings that are now widely known and allegedly the earliest texts mentioning the Colosseum discovered? Could it have been in the Vatican, and only after the decision to build the Colosseum in Rome, when it became necessary to find so-called primary sources to confirm its existence in the past? Let us take Suetonius's book as an example. The rest say approximately the same. Suetonius reports that Emperor Vespasian, upon his return from the Judean War, initiated the construction of several structures in Rome: the Temple of Peace, another temple, and an unnamed amphitheater in the center of the city. Suetonius writes, he also undertook new works, the Temple of Peace hard by the Forum, and one to the deified Claudius on the Salian Mount, which was begun by Agrippina, but almost utterly destroyed by Nero, also an amphitheater in the heart of the city, a plan which he learned that Augustus had cherished. Modern commentators believe that Suetonius is referring here specifically to the Colosseum. However, Suetonius does not call the amphitheater the Colosseum, nor provide any details about it. He simply writes about an amphitheater. Why must this necessarily be the Colosseum? There is no evidence for this. Eutropius, in his summary from the founding of Rome, attributes the construction of an amphitheater to Emperor Titus Vespasian, the son of Emperor Vespasian. However, he also provides no details that allow the amphitheater of Titus to be definitively identified as the Colosseum. It is sparsely mentioned only that Titus Vespasian built an amphitheater in Rome, during the consecration of which 5,000 beasts were killed in the arena. Another so-called ancient historian, Sextus Aurelius Victor, writes in the History of Rome that during the reign of Emperor Flavius Vespasian, the restoration of the Capitoline Hill, the Temple of Peace, Claudius monuments, the Forum, and much more was begun and completed in Rome. An amphitheater of enormous size was also constructed. However, no details are provided that would allow this amphitheater to be definitively identified as the Colosseum. There is no mention of the amphitheater's exact size, as enormous is a relative term, how it was constructed, or where in the city it was located. Again, the question arises: why assume this is the Colosseum? Perhaps Aurelius Victor was referring to an entirely different amphitheater. And so on. The accounts of Roman writers provide absolutely no basis for identifying the Flavian amphitheater with the modern Colosseum. As for On the Spectacles by the Roman poet Martial, which is thought to celebrate the Colosseum, it also contains nothing that unequivocally points to the Colosseum. Moreover, the book itself could be a forgery, as it has long been noted that it suspiciously differs from Martial's other works. Even if Martial's On the Spectacles is authentic, where is the evidence that it refers to the Colosseum? There is none. It is entirely possible that Martial and Roman historians were speaking not of the Colosseum in Italy but of another amphitheater. Especially since the ruins of a very suitable massive Roman amphitheater that matches these descriptions indeed exist. However, this is not the Colosseum in Italian Rome. Unlike the Italian Colosseum, this other genuine Colosseum is not advertised at all. Historians surround it with complete silence and try to pretend it does not exist. Yet in reality, it does exist, but not in Rome, in Istanbul.